And so then in that category of senior assistance, we have two proposals. One is from South Carolina Association of Community Action Partnerships, and the other is South Carolina Uplift Community Outreach. So I will open the floor for any discussion, and by that I mean I'm looking at you, Councilman Branham. Do you have any comments or questions about either of these applications? If not, I'm always good for a question.
If you have some, Ms. New, why don't you go ahead, and then I'll just come back in after that if I need to.
Thank you, and thank you to the staff for getting additional information. As closely as I try to read, I may sometimes miss things, so if this is buried in here somewhere, please let me know. The question that I had about these applications, and I guess I'll ask them of both of them, though I primarily have it for the home repair project, is if these applicants have given any information or provided any assurance, might be too strong a word, but that they're servicing everyone equally across Richland County. So for example, on page 181 of my book for the Richland County Home Repair Project for seniors, hold on, is this the page? Actually, it might have been someplace else in my packet. They list 3 specific zip codes that they're going to be targeting. And then it says, and then other qualified census tracts if funds allow. So I wasn't clear if that meant that we're going to prioritize these specific areas, and then if there's money left, we'll go to these others, or just that they didn't want to do an exhaustive list of all the qualified census tracts in the county. And I just wonder if anyone has that information. Taking a break.
Got you.
Thank you, sir. Always grateful for the opportunity. Ms. Newton, if I may.
Please.
We don't know if these are just the qualified areas that they're referencing, or if they are just not, or if there will be others. I do know that per ARPA rules and regulations, qualified census tracts are much more desirable for compliance reasons, and these are districts that they specifically list are listed as qualified census tracts.
Thank you. And so just specifically, and I can move on from this item and we can see if we can get an answer before council, but what it says is it lists the 3 zip codes, and then it says, and other qualified census tracts. And so then I was just trying to figure out if that meant they were all included equally, or if they were prioritizing those first ones as we are dispersing funds on the county's behalf. So that was my question specifically to them. But if you know anything about our other applicant for the Richland County Aging in Place project, if that is also applicable to all residents of Richland County.
I will find out. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Those were my questions.
Ms. Newton, I'd be recognized.
You're recognized, Mr. Branham.
What's a qualified census tract?
These are areas within the county as designated by the federal government as having a majority low to moderate income and other qualities that would tend to make their residents be below the threshold for services and for income.
Anybody have any speculation about whether that is more important to the program than it would be to Richland County when it comes to, granting these funds?
Hi,
Hi.
good afternoon. I'm Director Harris with Grants Department here at Richland County. And so there's something very important about the LMI communities that we work with. Excuse me, I have terrible asthma, so I'm out of breath today. But with our LMI communities and QCT tracks, essentially what we're looking at is particularly marginalized communities that otherwise may not be able to receive the funds that are necessary to improving services or infrastructure. So it's very important with the ARPA process that we do gather this information specifically for those areas. I know that when we are working with other grants, we're looking at those LMI communities as well, and it's important that we reach out to those communities that often are impacted by less infrastructure and less services.
If we have qualification, or if the program has stated qualifications as it relates to income or things like that, I mean, there's otherwise no reason that it couldn't be applied county-wide, right?
Correct. So the services can be applied countywide, but for the purpose of ARPA, there is always a direct connect and tie back to COVID-19 demonstrating harm to the community. So otherwise, they may actually have and capture folks within the community that serves a broad spectrum, but the targeted amount would be for those LMI QCT tracks. So it's yes and no.
Okay, do we need to be only giving funds that will benefit QCT areas, or can we give them to anybody in the county that qualifies?
We want to regulate it towards those QCT areas.
So, this is the first time I'm hearing this term today. Should we have been talking about this more through the whole process?
These are actually for our qualified census tract areas. So the census has decided that the majority of these areas within Richland County are LMI. And so these particular nonprofits applying, they serve these communities more prevalently, but there are opportunities within that to serve other residents of Richland County. But these are a concentrated focus of the grant best practices, looking at mostly marginalized communities that would otherwise not have these services.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Newton, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Brown?
And Mr. Branham, I can't recall, because we've been doing this for a little while now with COVID-19. So some of these conversations, we have to try to remember if there are other members who haven't been a part of, during the initial, but we did talk about the importance of making sure that when we utilize dollars associated with the American Rescue Plan Act funds, what we want to try to do is make sure that we marry as closely as possible what the federal government said was the focus of these funds. And in many instances, they communicated that a very successful utilization of these funds would happen if you affect individuals in a positive way that are in qualified census tracts or that are in the low to moderate income area, and that we know that those are qualifying reasons that the funds could be used, which would limit really any of our concerns about whether or not the county made a good decision in providing these funds to an agency or a sub-recipient or a beneficiary, which are other terms that we used before. And so I just wanted you to be aware that when we just asked that question, I just thought to myself, well, maybe, we didn't think about, we have members on board who were not a part of this original conversation, and so we're using terminology and terms, and so we apologize for that, but this is a discussion and information that has been shared. I just want you and those constituents that you represent to not feel as though they were left out, and that that this is something that we're bringing up for the first time, even though it's kind of being introduced to you in this mechanism. So just wanted to share that with you. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, for the record, I've been on county council for 4 months. That's it.
Duly noted, Councilman Branham. Do you have any other Any other questions?
Yes, so are there QCTs in other zip codes in Richland County besides the 3 listed?
Yes, which is why I asked, I'm sorry, I know they're going to answer, but that's why I asked my question, just to say, is this a prioritization? Because it does say "and others." And so for me, that's a question that I would like to forward before we get to the next council meeting.
I don't know if we know the answer to this right now, but are there QCTs in every zip code in Richland County?
Yes, there are pockets of QCT LMI in every community. And so as we look across Richland County, the only areas that strikingly are observed in the HUD areas are the incorporated areas to which we do not serve since they receive direct apportionments from CDBG HUD. But in this sense, yes, we have LMI in every community in zip
Okay.
code.
Thank you. Looks like the program does great things. And yeah, just some good targeted work there as to what I understand to be the eligibility criteria there. Anything else on SC Uplift?
No, I mean, I have a similar question for them just about the area that they serve, but they didn't call out zip codes specifically, so I don't have any reason to believe that the service isn't countywide. But of course, we can inquire. My recommendation, if there's no further discussion, would be I actually move to allocate $500,000 to each organization, as these are the only 2 applications that met our vetting criteria to be referred for this category, and then that would exhaust the funds for this category.
I'll second that, and then I have a couple other things for discussion before the vote.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. Discussion.
So I'm just looking at how this reconciles with the unhoused persons category, and didn't know if we should factor that in as to the amounts that we want to grant under the senior assistance category before we look at the unhoused persons category.
I mean, that's certainly, at the discretion of this body, if reading between the lines, hopefully correctly, I do think that funds that a group receives in one category can affect the funds that they receive in another category. And in terms of order, I'm happy to have a discussion about the other category first, if you would prefer to do that.
Of course, I do bring that up because the second applicant is apparently the Alston Wilkes Society, or at least an affiliate, which is also one of the applicants under the unhoused persons. So I'll probably just make sure to be mindful of that as we move on to the next category, but I have no further discussion.
All right, Mr. Brown, you're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. If you wouldn't mind amending your motion to include up to the amount that you recommended.
I would love to amend my motion. I would like for all of my motions about money to say up to. I give blanket permission for that moving forward. I move to amend my motion that it is up to $500,000 for each organization. Does the seconder of the motion accept that?
Yes.
All right, then it's been moved and properly seconded. Will you call for the vote, please?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron, Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
On my agenda back. That brings us to item, I want to say 4A2. Yes, 4A2, the unhoused persons category. And then I know that we have this information and we have it in different places, but could someone from staff just briefly address crossover from this category to other categories, just so that it's clearly stated for the record?
Thank you, Ms. Newton. I think this is working now. In this category, we do have crossover for the Alston Wilkes Society. They were just in the previous group that we actually worked with. The Midlands Housing Alliance is also in additional groups. And I believe the mental illness and transitions is also in multiple locations within the applications and recommended groups.
Thank you. And I'm trying to cross-reference really quickly and may not be looking at the right place. As it relates to the Midlands okay, so the Midlands Housing Alliance is also in food insecurity.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the only other category?
Yes, ma'am, for these groups, yes.
Okay. And then, please forgive me, there have just been so many votes and this has lasted so long. Have we already awarded the food insecurity category, is my recollection.
No, ma'am, we have not.
But we talked about it. Okay. Gotcha. All right, thank you. While Ms. Thomas is here, do we have any other questions for staff about these applications? You're recognized, Mr. Branham.
So Mercy is also an applicant of multiple categories?
They may have been an applicant for multiple categories. However, I only see that they were a recommended vendor. I apologize for that, for one. My apologies.
Thank you. It looks like there are no other questions for you at this time, Ms. Thomas. Then with that, I will open the floor to discussions. And since, Mr. Branham, it's just basically you and me who are allowed to speak to this item, I'm happy to let you recognize yourself at your pleasure. I'm flipping to that page in my book. And if the citizens at home saw all of the paperwork that we have, they would understand.
That's page 315.
Yeah, I'm just getting there. It's taking a minute. And so also, I'm looking here, this is different than the original one that I was looking at. In terms of the requested amount and what we have, so we have allocated $2 million for this category, and then the request that we have for unhoused persons exceeds this by $94,950. According to the supplement I have. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
We get that sheet up on the screen?
Page 15 in the binder. I can hook in.
And one more question, just for the good of clarity. So while transitions is listed here, it's listed as a pre-selected project. And so I want to confirm if that means you are recognizing previous funds that were allocated to transitions.
That is correct. That was the FY23 allocation for $200,000 that's included in these numbers. So that means actually there's $1.894950 million remaining to allocate.
Thank you. I promised myself I would be faster at this meeting this week, and I'm not sure if I'm keeping that promise, but I'm trying. So then, with that in mind, transitions really isn't on this category.
That is correct.
Okay, that was just the previous funding. Mr. Branham, do you have any questions about any of these applicants?
Not right now.
Thank you. And then, Ms. Barron, I'm not sure which of these organizations you volunteer with, but presuming they're organizations that you don't, are there any questions that you have or any comments that you'd like to make about any of these other organizations?
Thank you, Ms. Newton. So my only concern is the same one that I've lifted up in every category, and I feel very confident in our staff and the third-party vendor that as we look at these applications, that we do really take a closer look and to make sure that we are, or the applicants are not supplanting the funds, they're not replacing, I'll use that terminology, they're not replacing the dollars that they receive from us in return for dollars that they already have. The main objective for these dollars are to supplement what they don't have, and given that some of these are listed in various categories, even though they're not the applicant, I just want to make sure that we are not funding, and I'll just be real specific, like about Austin Wilkes. You know, I don't want us to fund the same project at Austin Wilkes, 3 or 4 different times. And I think that particular agency does give me some concern. We previously talked about senior resources, and that was cleared up for me because I was able to look to see, okay, they're using this funds for Meals on Wheels, this for something else. And so as we were able to clear senior resources up, I hope that we can also be as clear about Austin Wilkes, because they are in there multiple times, as well as, did I make that up, that Mercy was in this one?
They are in this category.
Okay, and the same would apply for that organization as well. And those are the two that in this category that just brings me concern. And then to I would like to speak to, given that we're so close to being able to award all of these applicants, one of which asked for, half of the money. And just in good faith, I know that when we do our desk reviews, some things may change. But I would like to ask this body to be mindful of the amounts in which we're distributing, because conceivably we've got some smaller pots that are asking, and I think this is the only category that we have people asking for, 10,000, 30,000 realistic numbers, and that's all I have to say. Thank you, Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. And so then, as we look at this category, in terms of duplications, the 2 duplicates that we have are the 2 organizations who have been recommended for funding in other categories. I don't want to assume that it's a duplication because it may not be, are the Midlands Housing Alliance and the Austin Wilkes Society. And then I am looking to see, so the Austin Wilkes Society has also been recommended for workforce training, which is a category that has not been awarded yet. And that is the only other instance I see. Is that correct?
Senior assistants.
Senior assistants.
So, Ms. Newton, if I may, the point that I was making, even though they may not be the applicant, they may be a partner.
Sure.
And so, in Austin Wilkes and if anybody from Austin Wilkes is here or watching, we're not picking on you. We just want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the money that we've been given. And so, it would be to our advantage to make sure that we're not funding. Let's say they had a shoe tie-in club. And so the previous applicant in the senior group, they're going to use their money for the shoe tying club. And now Austin Wilkes in the unhoused group is applying for more money for the shoe tying club. So here it is now, we are funding the same project twice. And so that's what I want us to take a deeper dive to look at. Does that help clear up where I was going with that?
It does, and you're correct that sometimes when you're looking at the names that are listed here, they don't necessarily correspond with the name that the average person in the community would recognize. And so I appreciate you referencing that. Also, I have a question for you. As I look at this list again, I have a family member that I think has received services from one of these organizations. Do I need to recuse myself from voting on that organization? Not a person that lives in my household, but just want to be clear as I'm looking at this.
Okay. You said just received in the past at some point or
Yes.
currently?
It's not my business, so I mean, so let's, just to make it a brighter line, let's say currently.
To be on the safe side, I might recommend for that particular. The only problem is,
I understand that, and it only really just occurred to me when I was looking at the list again. So, okay. So then, for correctness, because I know that, Ms. Barron recused herself and isn't chairing, I'm happy to disclose the organization if that is helpful, and then we can decide how we want to move forward with this.
which category?
It is this unhoused persons category. It's not, those aren't the services, it's just the organization.
Probably, we could probably talk about more specifics at another point, but I guess at this point, I probably would, just to be on the safe side,
Okay.
recommend recusing yourself from that particular category in-house
From the
person.
category, the whole entire category, or just from that person? I mean, sorry, from that organization.
Well, I don't, right now, we're doing categories, so it's not a specific. What you vote on may affect that organization and other organizations. Like I say, organizations 1, 2, and 3, for
Sure.
example. And the one you may have a concern with is organization 3, and say there's $30,000. You could split it evenly. You could say, well, a certain amount to 1 and 2 or 3. So your decision could affect that entity for that particular category.
So practically speaking, there are 3 members on this committee.
I know.
2/3 of them would be recused from this category. What would be the mechanism with which to proceed?
Send it to full council.
Ms. Barron, you're recognized.
So I just want to ask a question. Do we have to vote, or could we not vote on each organization individually versus a large category? Because even like in rules and appointment, we do not do a blanket vote for individuals, but sometimes we make motions based upon individuals. Could we not do that in this?
The difference is that, say, we just did seniors, for example, and there was $1 million. The $1 million is for the category, and you have to make a decision on how you're going to split it up between the organizations. So if, say, in the seniors, hypothetically, just say Alton Wilkes, since they were one of them, how you split that money up, the committee makes that decision as far as what the recommendation is. So there's really no way to unwed the category with each individual organization, because the $1 million goes towards the category, so you can split it up different ways. So you really can't, deal with that.
One follow-up question. So, and this would be for you, ACA Thomas. So we have removed $200,000 from this category, which gives us a remainder of, if I'm just a simple math, 1.8. And of the ones that are listed here that are requesting funds, what is the balance of the request?
1.8945 million. So you would be over $94,950. I do want to point out one thing that I wanted to clarify, and I had to do a little bit of research. Ms. Newton, you had asked if Transitions was not listed duplicately. They are, because Transitions is the Midlands Housing Alliance.
Okay.
And
So-
if you have any, I guess, other questions about it, we can enter executive session to discuss.
Yes, but I feel like I have enough guidance for this for now. And thank you, and thank you, Ms. Thomas, for that clarification, because I did think Transitions was here, and maybe we need the AKA next to everything, or DBA, so that I don't offend any Greek sensibilities as it relates to this category. So then, your recommendation, unless you think we do need to go into executive session right now, though I certainly think we need future conversations, would be that this item is forwarded blanketly to full council. That's
Yes.
forwarded without a recommendation.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I'll move that we send this matter to council without a recommendation.
And I will second that. Am I allowed to, actually? Or do we just, now that does it just go?
I said it, so it's happening.
You the man.
All right, Mr. Wright, can this motion even be
Yeah.
seconded?
They're trying to
Well, I
reach
think
the
that
shirt.
what you can do is that there will be a report for council, it'll be a part of the report, and then council can vote at that point to take it up.
I withdraw my second. But I note that it's happening, Mr. Branham. I note that.
Well, I should withdraw my motion then?
Sure.
All right, withdrawn.
So I really, it's not, like I said, it's not a person that lives in my household. It's not this service, and I apologize that it only just occurred to me, or I would have been sitting looking like Ms. Barron, like, oh my gosh, I thought we were going to be able to move this forward. So with that, it is my delight and pleasure to return control of this meeting to Chairwoman Barron.
Good grief.
Yes.
You know, in the Bible it says, when I would do good, evil is always present.
That's what I feel like in this moment. But anywho, back to business at hand. I do want to, just take a point of personal privilege to say to Ms. Newton, thank you, because that's a part of this whole process, and transparency is really, digging deep in here and saying, oh, you know what, I know someone, or I'm part of this organization, because when it's said and done, when these funds are in the hands of the community, we want them to only have the good things to say about Richland County. And so thank you, Ms. Newton, even though it does kind of feel like, a low blow for us, not being able to go to full council.
Oh, it is going.
It's going to full council, it's just not going with the recommendation, which is not one of my favorite things. But we'll definitely have to make sure that our colleagues are briefed properly on the information so they can make an informed decision. So with that, we'll move on to item 4B, which are staff updates, and 4B1 is affordable housing. Mr. Brown, you want to give us an update on where we are with that, just for the viewing audience? We did at our last meeting ask staff to explore some opportunities for us to look at how we can fund affordable housing in a different mechanism, and to still be true to our original process and our original goal, and that was to address affordable housing in Richland County. And so now Mr. Brown and his wonderful team, I'm sure they have a great recommendation for us.
So in reviewing this process, one of the things that we looked into and found out is that we do want to set you up for success. And what you just talked about and what you just went through here came across our understanding as a way to make sure that we did not create a situation where you were trying to do good and it ended up not happening the way you wanted to. So specifically, to move this item forward in one fashion is that we're going to be recommending that you make a recommendation to council to approve funding that is available for the purposes of affordable housing, so that the staff could, let me be clear. So one is the funding and one is the mechanism. So the mechanism you haven't decided, but funding wise, we believe that there should be some sort of authorization that would permit staff to use available funding to address affordable housing, and then the methodology, whether that's the adding of new units to the roles, or whether that's you had a discussion that happened in the committee, but it wasn't, I think, all committee members about spaces that may not be available, but that could be potentially renovated and made as affordable housing. That particular question, we need the committee to tell us, but from a funding mechanism, all we want you to do is to recommend the council to approve funding for affordable housing in whatever, if you want to say the same amount that you have here, but just say available funding, within the county's, budget. And that's we needed something as general and flexible as that, and the staff will then utilize funding to address the method that you determine. So we want to separate potentially the funding from the method. So if you wanted to move forward with one or the other, you have that ability. Because I know right now you have not determined the method. But we definitely know what the pot of funding can be within the county's budget, and we would recommend that the county council authorize staff to use available funding within the county's budget to affect affordable housing, and then you add the method when you determine the method. And you may say, well, Mr. Brown, that's a little vague. What I will tell you is we want the flexibility within the budgetary constraints to do what you want, which could potentially give you the avenues, open up avenues for you. That's why we're saying it that way, because we don't want you to limit yourself as a body as to how you do that. And by doing that, it does free up a lot of the concerns that you just kind of expressed here within your own discussions. So that's the two-pronged approach. We know what we want you to do with the funding, but we do need to find out what methodology you want to utilize for affordable housing. And that's something we still need to get from you, though.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Brown. So with that, I do want to open it up for discussion. And in our discussion, I think there are two things that the administrator has identified, and that would be, number one, we've already decided that we're going to disperse these funds through the budget, but we need to be able to authorize Mr. Brown and his team now to do so. So with that, we want, I think let's have some discussion if we want to try to have both of them go together. And when I say both of them, the available funding, the motion for available funding, and the mechanism, or do we want to separate them apart? In my head, I'm thinking it's budget time. So we do want to, if that is the case, we don't want to hold this in committee because we're uncertain about the mechanism. We can always have another conversation about the mechanism. And so I do see Mr. Livingston's hand, but we're going to take Ms. Newton first. We'll take Ms. Newton, and then Mr. Livingston will grab you next.
Well, first, kudos to you for noticing hands on the screen, because I did not.
Hands in the audience, it's in hands before us also. Ms.
Still,
Carrillo's doing a good job.
Everybody can take the win. So just to that to the point that you just made, my recommendation would be that we handle them separately, if only because one item is completely clear and has agreement, and it doesn't require a lot of rigmarole. There's a better word, I'm sure. So since that's the case, let's not bog it down where there's uncertainty. And so I will wait until Mr. Livingston has a chance to speak. I was trying to write down the language from Mr. Brown, and I would be prepared to make a motion when hearts and minds are clear. I do have another question, and I bring it up frequently, so sorry. As part of that, allocating the available funding for affordable housing, do you feel that we need to commemorize via motion the fact that we're spending those funds from general dollars, but that, I don't know the right word here,
No,
but
ma'am.
no.
I believe I know what you're asking.
But basically that we don't, why don't you say words since you know them?
The staff, in our recommendation that you were potentially going to consider making, there's a level of understanding within that. So what we understand is there's flexibility within the budget. We're going to stay within the constraints of the budget, and no additional funds other than what's been authorized within that confines will be utilized. So it's
I actually then maybe was going a different direction, so let me
Okay.
try to find more words. As we look at the ARPA funding, this is imprecise language, but that we were essentially saying we had allocated $4 million in ARPA funds. ARPA funds are too restrictive to allow us to meet the goals that we want to meet for affordable housing. Therefore, instead of using these ARPA funds for
so no,
affordable
ma'am.
housing.
So I knew where you were going.
Okay, so
And
the
no,
answer's
ma'am.
the same.
I don't want that. We don't.
All right.
That is not the way we view this.
Okay.
And that's not in the best interest of us to view it that way.
Sure.
And so we understand that the county has committed to serving affordable housing, and then a discussion talked about an amount. In utilizing the entirety of the county's budget, the staff has made a review, and we understand that that pot of funding, the amount, should remain the same, I guess, up to that amount.
I wrote
And
down
that
up
we
to.
will, all we're asking for you is to allow us to use the best method of
Sure.
providing the funds to affect affordable housing, and we will make that determination internally within the constraints of the budget that you have approved, and that makes everything, that releases any concerns that we have about tying any one thing to another.
So while I have the floor, let me just go ahead and make sure that I have this language right for when we come back to it after everyone has had a chance to speak. So would a motion look like authorizing the administrator to allocate up to $4 million of available funding for affordable housing?
That's an awesome motion.
All right. Ms. Barron, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Newton. Mr. Livingston, you're recognized. Mr. Livingston? Okay. We can't hear you, Mr. Livingston. We're still not hearing you, sir. We'll continue the conversation, and once we get, do you have him? He was on and off. Try again, sir. Unmute. Okay. We'll keep moving, and then once we figure out what's going on with Mr. Livingston, Mr. Livingston, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Sorry about whatever that was. Now, what I was saying was I thought the last meeting, the committee decided to allow ask the administrator to move forward and come back with some kind of proposal regarding how to administer the affordable housing funds, or the funds that we leave available for affordable housing. That's some kind of mechanism, is what I thought happened the last time.
Yes, sir. In part, yes. And so I'll let Mr. Brown address this.
Sure. So part of that discussion, Mr. Livingston, was this funding concern or opportunity, which potentially allows us to address affordable housing in multiple ways. But one of the things we also still need to know from the committee is, for example, within the request of the applicants, some of them were talking about utilizing those dollars to affect physical structures. You also had requests, I think many of you all received requests that talked about the county potentially making some sort of investment fund or trust fund, if you will. So when we talk about the mechanism itself, those certainly are, two, they're not opposing things, but one is kind of putting money in a place to where it could have some future use, and then one is dispersing funds today. So, and then there's certainly, the question about whether or not affordable housing is the adding of new units, which this committee talked about. They believe it was his intent, versus, someone making current units, less costly. So what I'm asking for, Mr. Livingston, is we've got the funding potentially that we're asking you to do, which allows all of those things. But to get a little tighter or deeper into that would be, for example, a discussion or clarity on, do you want a multi-pronged approach where you want investments and infrastructure, or are you looking really more for infrastructure, which takes, for example, that fund, off the table? So those are the types of things we think we need to hear from you from a decision standpoint, so that we can then give you something more definitive to do that thing, whichever one or combination that it may be, sir.
All right, I was just thinking opposite. I was just thinking that we had staff and folks in the housing area and folks that dealt with affordable housing and so forth to come to me and give me some ideas and recommendations. I was thinking more of it that way.
And that's part of it too, sir. But that's part of it. From, we want to get in folks give us input from things that you want to consider. And so if it's wide open and all things are on the table, then we can take away from this meeting and do that. If that's exactly what we're hearing from the committee, is that everything's an option and that we're not focused on any particular area of the affordable housing discussion. Because I was looking at for example, a trust fund versus adding new units, in the next few months as different things. But maybe I'm limited in my view of that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So where we stand on this particular item is because this is a budget item, in my mind, I'm thinking this is a budget item, and because it's a budget item and we are no longer going to use ARPA dollars to address affordable housing, but in return, we are going to authorize the administrator to look within the confines of our budget to allow us to address affordable housing in that area. I do think that we had lengthy conversation about what we wanted to see in affordable housing, but I do think we need to have additional conversation about giving the administrator at least some particular guidance. And I think we left it really wide open for them to do. And that would require, really, when we look at the affordable housing industry, if I can say it that way, we'd probably need a third-party person to come in just to help us to identify what affordable housing is and what that looks like for us in Richland County. So I think that as we move forward in the discussion, and if it is to take a two-pronged approach and move forward with a motion with as far as funding is concerned, and then this body will come back and have further conversation as to how what the method is going to be to really streamline it a little bit more for the administration, then we can do that. But again, this is open for discussion, and if there is a motion, I'll entertain one or not. Ms. Newton.
First, I have a question. So again, what we've been discussing is a two-pronged approach. One is allocating funding so that can be in our budget for this year. And then the second prong is identifying the process or mechanism by which that funding will be allocated. So my question is, are there any notable disadvantages to going ahead and approving the funding now and then following up later with the mechanism?
No, ma'am.
Am I still recognized, Ms. Barron?
Yes, you are.
I move to authorize the administrator to allocate up to $4 million in available funding for affordable housing.
I'll second it for discussion. Mr. Brandon, you're recognized.
I'm really looking forward to and support seeing the county supporting affordable housing, particularly efforts to add new affordable housing units to the community. I believe I've followed the conversation as it relates to the budget and the $4 million amount here. I definitely would support the $4 million in ARPA funds going towards affordable housing, but I'm just personally not comfortable with, that I would want more details about where the money was coming from and, how it was going to be budgeted for. My understanding is that this would be a motion to recommend that council allocate $4 million of general funds to affordable housing. And then we would, not be voting as to ARPA funds on this particular category. So if that's the case, I'll be a no vote.
Mr. Brown?
Yes. And so one of the things that the motion said was it just said available funding. And so it did not designate, what fund. And we can have more of a discussion about that, about, why you want the flexibility and what that means, and to hopefully provide clarity for that. Because in short, what happens is the county is able to address what it wants to do, and its limits of what it can do are, in so many words, kind of lifted. And so what we're trying to suggest is the American Rescue Plan Act funding that the county chose to make available for these grant funds are all by choice. And you have the ability within the constraints to make choices that best reflect what you want to accomplish and make best use of the available dollars that you have. And tying yourself potentially to one particular mechanism may not allow you to do as much as you want to do. And so we're trying to broaden that so that you can accomplish it. There are no new dollars that we're asking for. All of the budget potentially you would vote for, so you would know what funding in general was being used for, so it wouldn't be anything that hadn't been previously approved by county council that would be being funded. Anything that would be being funded with the funds would always have to have been approved by council. You're just not saying I'm going to use funds from the county attorney's budget for this matter, but if the administrator has the ability to use funds to address the county attorney's needs, then whether they're funds that are already in this budget or funds that are in another budget, regardless, I can address that as well as take care of the county's needs. So that's all that we're trying to accomplish. But if we could maybe have a discussion, I can hear from you kind of what your specific concerns are. Other members might have those concerns, and so that may just affect how we're able to address these.
Madam Chair, can I be recognized?
One moment, Mr. Livingston. Mr. Branham still has the floor.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I appreciate the explanation from Mr. Brown. I think I've followed the whole conversation and those comments, and I understand the advantages to having money that is less constrained. I think for me, it's just a matter of what seems to be the request of administration, the motion of Ms. Newton, or conversation about a proposed motion. It's just too broadly worded for me. And I mean, that's fine. It is what it is. We're not always going to have unanimity and opinions on things. So, you know, I'm comfortable with where things are as they are.
Thank you, Mr. Branham. So we'll take Ms. Newton and then Mr. Livingston.
Thank you. And you're right, we don't always have to have unanimity, even though I still love you just as much, Councilman Branham. But just for any citizen who may be listening, I want to clarify the intent of my motion. So a few things, and then I'll have the county administrator attorney correct me if I'm incorrect in anything here. But first, for me, the purpose of this motion is to set aside funds that we would have in the budget that we can then use once we pick the specific mechanism we want. Similar to the way that we allocate funds that can be used for staffing before we've identified the specific person we want to hire, or similarly to how we allocate money for capital improvement before we pick which of the specific capital improvement projects. This simply sets aside the funds. It does not remove any obligation that we have as a body to fully vet what would come before us. And so even by approving this motion today, it does not mean that the administrator would or could go off willy-nilly and start implementing affordable housing programs. Any specific use of these funds would still have to come back to the full body for approval. So again, the purpose of my motion is to simply acknowledge that this is a priority and set aside those funds so that when we are ready to expend them, we can, because if we don't set aside the money, then it potentially wouldn't be there. So just for any member of the listening public, we are 100% still following our regular purchasing and our regular voting rules. Anything would come before council, and citizens would also have the opportunity to comment. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you for allowing me to address that, Ms. Barron.
No, so and you really lift up a good point, because I as you were speaking, it came across my head that, you know, I don't want anyone to think that, you know, we're going to fund affordable housing and not fund something else that we've funded in the past that is a necessity. And so the administrator was quite clear when he said available funding, and that's just that. It's available funding. We are not, you know, taking away someone else's budget. You know, Attorney Wright, we're not going to take your budget, you know, and build houses. We're just not going to do that to you. And so I thank you, Ms. Livingston, for clearing that up. I call you Miss Livingston.
It's okay.
Miss Newton, and Mr. Livingston, you're recognized. You see how quickly I caught myself. I felt in my eyes.
Y'all have covered pretty much what I wanted to cover, because I don't want anybody to assume that you're supplying any money from the general fund, because what we're saying is we're just simply saying, in effect, we're just going to use some ARPA funds to take care of that general fund matter, and then supplant those funds to take care of housing. So it doesn't have any negative. It wouldn't have any negative impact on the general fund. Just want to repeat what y'all said. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
You recognize.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the motion that was made, part of the purpose is to, as was stated, not to limit what you can do, because with, specifically with the ARPA funds, and to a certain distinction, any federal funds, there will be stringent limitations, and you can be audited about how you use it, and you have to explain certain things. And there's strict time constraints, or specifically for affordable housing, where if you want to do something major, a lot of things wouldn't be possible to do with ARPA. There are certain things you can do, but they're limited. So I think specifically for affordable housing, this takes those restraints off and doesn't limit you just to ARPA funds. And anything that administration would come back with would have to be approved and voted on by the council. So this just allows them to have the opportunity to kind of have a broader net to see what the options are, whether it's short-term or long-term or both, and takes the limits off.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Carrillo?
Branham,
No.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Our next item is 4B2, desk reviews. Mr. Brown, you're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, I'm going to recognize ACA Thomas, if you don't mind, to walk you through this information.
I recognize ACA Thomas.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. As you requested from the last meeting, we did meet with Guidehouse and discuss actually having them desk reviews. I have actually gotten desk reviews back on 3 of the 5 applicants that you all approved. Guidehouse is now in the process of discussing their concerns, very similar to an audit that you would have for any group on an annual basis. They listed as concerns and findings, and they will be working with these groups to review those concerns, review those findings, and to lay out the groundwork of what acceptable and compliant funding is. I'd also remind everybody that this is not a funding scenario where we are funding the projects up front. These are on a reimbursement basis, so we will not know the exact amounts of expenditures until the projects are complete. However, we will be bringing you updates from Guidehouse as they work through these, and they will be doing these on every allocation. So we'll be going back, and once these recommendations today go to council, and if and when they're approved, we will send those to them for the same process.
And so ACA Thomas, the 5 that are complete, do you need a motion to move forward with those items, or we've already taken care of that?
No, ma'am, you've already taken care of that. Once they were approved, you approved up to. So we will be working now. They'll work through the desk review with these groups. Then they'll be working with setting up the agreements for them, and then the drawdowns will begin. And as I said, we'll keep you up to date on the progress.
I have another question, but I'll wait. Definitely want to recognize my colleagues first, Ms. Newton or Mr. Branham. And so my next question would be, it's always, one of those things that I really push forward to seeing the good news of Richland County. So I don't want us to wait to have a blanketed press release or a blanket announcement saying that these funds have been awarded. Is it possible that we can go ahead and do some type of acknowledgement saying, we have awarded, and I know it's going to be a trickery kind of thing because we don't know the amount just yet that we're giving to each
I'm sorry, you mean a tricky thing?
I meant to say tricky.
Thank
I didn't
you.
mean to say
We
trickery.
just- thank you.
I didn't. Thank you. Yes, thank you for clearing me up. It's tricky thing. But I don't want us to wait because we're getting calls and emails regularly saying that we've not awarded the money, and that's not necessarily true. We're ongoing, as you just described, that we have some organizations that are getting ready to get started with this process. So could we go ahead and start making those announcements?
That would be up to the administrator.
My head was shaking yes. My words are also saying yes.
Thank you.
We can work on that, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
It would be, I think it would be to our advantage if we could just continue as we move these different pots forward. It's kind of like one of my favorite commercials, and another one. Yeah, we want them to say, and another one. Here comes another one. All right. Any other conversation or discussion on this item? If not, next item is adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.